Sarah, thanks for being here, for doing this. What else should people know about you in terms of who you are and how you got here?
Oh, thanks for having me. And that feels like a big, big question. It's always
Yeah,
hard to
vague on
define
purpose.
myself through a professional bio. But I think I would add to that everything that I teach and that I share stems out of my own life experiences. And I really kind of chronicle my own journey of becoming, of evolving through my books and then through my teachings. And I learn things and then I turn around and I share them to hopefully make other women's journeys even just a little bit easier, but hopefully a lot easier when I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me more about who you work with specifically and how you help them.
I work with women entrepreneurs, so business owners, coaches, consultants, therapists, creatives, service providers, and particularly women entrepreneurs who have more of a spiritual orientation and are coming from a heart centered approach and are wanting to bring their work into the world or bring it forward in a bigger way as an expression of their deepest self.
Yeah.
IFS, the self with a capital S.
Hmm.
And so the women that I work with have been around the block, you could say, in terms of spirituality and personal development. Many are therapists, many are have really experienced a lot and studied a lot and are still struggling with some deeper issues, which I think we'll probably be talking more about as we go.
Yeah, that would be great. Before we get into that and how specifically you apply IFS to your work with your clients, how did you come to IFS and what was your experience in, yeah, learning the model, coming to it, and using it in your work?
I I was first introduced to parts work in my 20s through the work of Hal and Sidra Stone and voice dialogue. And that was really instrumental for me in starting to build more of a relationship with my inner critic. And around that time, I started working with a mentor who I continue to mentor with. So that was 20 years ago. And so we've worked together for a couple of decades. And she started training in IFS. She had done all three levels of IFS. And 10 years ago, in one of our sessions, she started leading me through what I now understand to be the IFS model, the IFS process. And it was so powerful for me. So even though I'd done a lot of therapy, again, I'd done voice dialogue, been involved in spirituality for a couple of decades at that point, this was different. And she took me to one of my exiled parts and gave me a practice of checking in with her for a month. And I really felt deeply shifted as a result of that. And shortly after that, I experienced a big life upheaval. Long story short, the man that I was engaged to told me he'd been cheating on me for the majority of our several year relationship. And in the aftermath of that, this mentor of mine really urged me. She said, There, you really need to be doing IFS more intensively right now. So I could really just understand the parts of me that even led me to be in that relationship in the first place and just to deal with all the trauma that came up as a result of that depth of betrayal. So I started working with an IFS therapist weekly, and that led me into deeper and deeper regions of myself where I did very intensive and extensive healing. And at the end of that, I just felt a level of wholeness that I had never had access to before. And I just felt like I want to train in this. I want to be able to share this with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And given that what you do now is help women with their businesses, well, through helping them, how did IFS or how has IFS helped you with your own business?
It has helped me immensely and it continues to ever since. I say that entrepreneurship is like the Olympics of personal development. It brings our stuff up in such a big way.
Yeah.
And there's so many internal challenges that come up and there's so many external challenges And those two things makes it kind of like a high intensity sport times. And so for me, it really helped me to identify when I'm being parts led and when I'm being self led. So when I have kind of taskmaster parts or pushing parts leading the way, when there are parts that are afraid, like younger parts of me that are afraid, feeling fear around money or feeling fear around being judged or not liked. And it gives me the tools to see those trailheads and to get curious about those parts and then start to relate to them in more of a self-led way. So I have a much deeper awareness of leading from myself, leading from my wholeness, rather than from my parts or from my wounds. And that's significant for me.
It's interesting because I've been, self-employed essentially my whole career and also worked with a lot of self-employed people. I also have a separate business called Private Practice Workshop where I've been helping therapists through business coaching for years now. And what I find is that going back to kind of being driven by the wound or parts that are wounded um, is a really compelling energy source for a lot of entrepreneurs. A lot of the most quote unquote successful people I know by material measures are also often the most deeply wounded or have parts that have tremendous not good enough burdens or burdens of worthlessness, right? And there's even some fear then around if we work with those parts, and better yet, unburden them, that I won't have my edge anymore. Do you see this type of thing come up in your work? And if so, how do you, help people with that sort of thing?
I do. And like one of the things that I see a lot with women is kind of like a variation of that is this, especially women who are in midlife, where maybe they've had some success, they've had some experience in the past, but they've burned out from those protective parts, those workaholic parts that have pushed them. And I've had that experience too. And then they've seen like, I can't live like this anymore. I can't operate like this anymore, especially for women in life when you're going through perimenopause and menopause. Like it's just physically not possible to work at that level. And so in those cases, there's a real desire to discover a new way, to find that sort of energy source deeper within from more of the soul, from more of the self, rather than from those protective patterns. So I would say for the women that I work with, there's not that fear of losing that competitive edge. There's more of this desire or this curiosity. Like I know something else is possible, but I'm not sure how to do that. Or I'm not sure if I'm even capable of that.
Hmm.
And so in that case, I think it really helps to have role models. And I'm grateful to have a few role models in this realm of more spiritual entrepreneurship who have demonstrated to me it is possible to have a big impact, to make good money, to live a good life that's aligned with your values by not getting swallowed up in workaholism and hustle culture, but by really doing it from your deeper self. But I think it does help to just look out and see who's doing that. And then that shows our part, like it really is possible. And then we just start to put one foot in front of the other to operate from more of this self-led place and then just let our own experience become our teacher too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. When you think about the number of decisions that a business owner has to make, it's incredible. Whether it's should I take on this client or how much should I charge or should I open this new business that I've, an idea I've had for forever. How do you help people make those decisions from a place that is as self-led as possible?
I am a really big advocate of meditation. And for me, that's like sitting quietly and being in presence, observing my breath. But for other people, it can look other ways. It can be journaling. It can be just having some quiet time in nature or with your cup of coffee or tea. But the key is stillness and quiet and not letting in the stimuli from the world. Because in those spaces, we can tune into that still small voice inside, which in IFS, we call ourself. And that's where our guidance comes from. So whenever I have decisions I need to make, I don't make them at like the end of the day. If someone has a question for me that is more than just an easy answer, I just say, I'm going to sleep on it and I'll get back to you
Mm,
tomorrow.
yeah.
Or if I need longer than that, if it's a bigger decision, I'll take that. But definitely I'm going to sleep on it so that I I can kind of like put that into my subconscious mind as I sleep. And when I wake up and I'm doing my meditation, or maybe I need to go deeper and do some journaling about it and ask, like, what would you have me do? And then imagine that the universe or God or the big self is writing back to me. And then I get the guidance on how to move forward. And that's just like that's one of the ways that we can build a self-led business, just step by step by step or decision by decision by decision is it's taking the space and the time to go inside and see what's true, see what's here.
Mhm. You've mentioned spirituality, and um, I know it's an important part of what you do and who you are. And can you just say more about that in terms of how you integrate spirituality into your work, and especially as it relates to helping entrepreneurs?
For me, spirituality is like the basis of everything. And it has been for my whole adult life. And within entrepreneurship, it's really based on this concept from Greek philosophy that Carl Jung also spoke about a lot, and or of a modern day teacher, John Martini speaks about a lot, this concept of telos, which translates as your ultimate aim. And within each of us, within our hearts, or in IFS, you could say within our self, lives this telos. And it's like within an oak tree, or rather within an acorn, and there's the pattern of an oak tree. So within each of us, within our own hearts, there's the pattern of our highest unfolding. And I believe it is our spiritual aim, our spiritual mission here on this planet to fulfill that telos. And I see entrepreneurship as one of the most potent ways to do that, because building a business is like creating the structure through which
Mhm,
that telos, that which we are born to do, can flow out into the world, that our deepest gifts can be of service to other people. And I feel like that is one of the highest spiritual practices that we can enact on.
mhm. Yeah, that's wonderful. How do you help entrepreneurs start to get clear on, yes, who they are and what they want? In my experience, a lot of being a business owner is going back to my vision, right? Which is like, where is all of this heading? Why does my business exist? And what do I hope for the future to look like? Yeah, how do you help business owners with that part of things?
Or I do a similar thing in terms of vision, and I'm thinking about I have a year-long program. It's a mentorship and mastermind circle that's rooted in IFS. It's called Sorceress CEO. And the first masterclass that we do in that year is on setting your soul-centered foundation and really clarifying your vision. And I love the teaching from Stephen Covey in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, really advocating to begin with the end in mind. So I really advise women just take time, have some space around it, maybe do it on a day off, or if you have, some extra space in the morning, or even when you're on vacation out in nature, is to really just feel into what do I want my life to be? How do I want to live my days? Who do I want to spend my time with? How do I want to spend my time? And that can start to give us a sense of kind of how to reverse engineer things from there. But to get really clear on where you're going, it's like if you're designing your dream house, you want to first get a sense of like, well, what is my dream house? Like, how many rooms does it have? Where is it? What kind of architectural style does it have? And only from there can you start to craft the blueprint. And only from the blueprint can you actually start to build a house. So when we begin with the end in mind, then we know that there's a much better chance that the life we're constructing is going to actually, and the business we're building are actually going to be things that we like once we're inside of them.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really well said. What about did you ever read this book, The Big Leap?
Yes.
Yeah. So this guy, Gay Hendricks, came up with what he calls upper limit challenges, which are kind of like reasons why you could say, parts sabotage, or when we get close to reaching certain levels of success or breaking through glass ceilings of our own, why sometimes we have parts that sabotage or feel unworthy. Well, I'm curious your thoughts around those types of issues around like deserving, quote unquote, or entrepreneurs that are quite capable of more or of success or having a bigger impact, but there are parts that hold fears around being seen or am I worth it or imposter syndrome or why me? Do I deserve success? Whatever it might look like. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
One practice that I advocate is to hold an inner family meeting when you're doing visioning. And so this, like, say that you have a plan, say that you want to, a lot of women that I work with want to create a group program of some sort, whether it's an online course or group coaching program. And so it's like actually going inside and doing a meditation with our parts and envisioning ourselves, whether like our parts are sitting in a circle on the floor, around in nature, or around a conference table of some sort, and envisioning ourselves as the leader and just telling our parts like, this is the vision, this is what we like to do, and here's why. And then opening up space. Okay, so does anyone have any objections to this? Does anyone have any fears about this? And taking the space to really hear those out. And then you might need to spend some more time with some of the ones who hold more fears and objections. But then we're operating and we're moving forward from a place of more wholeness and not overriding our parts or bulldozing them, but really making sure that everyone's on board and gradually over time can start to move in the same direction. So this approach requires moving more slowly. However, one of the first things in IFS is that slow is fast. And we'll actually get to where we want to go more quickly if we're willing to slow down at these points where our protectors can kind of dig in their heels.
Mhm. Yeah, great. What else do you want us to know?
One of the biggest things that the women that I work with struggle with, and I think is a big one for entrepreneurs, is the fear of being seen and of being more visible, which is a necessary part of, quote, putting ourselves out there. And I just really want to validate that we all have that fear. And maybe you can tell me because you work with men. I don't work with men. I know it's a very big one for women.
Yeah.
And to recognize like those are parts of us. That's not who we are, but that who we are, one of the qualities of self energy is confidence and courage. And so when we're not feeling that, just to recognize, oh, that's a part of me. And if it's a part of me, I can build a relationship with it and I can support it.
Mhm.
Do you
This is a
notice
bit.
that with men?
Yeah, well, let me say that this is a big one, and I'm glad that we stumbled upon it because this fear of being seen is, prevalent, it's insidious. I think about it a lot because also let me say this, I see it less among men, and I think there's a lot of differences in the way that we're stereotypically gendered, and for whatever reason, men or little boys often come out of childhood with some sense of like, I can be exactly what I want or whoever I want or as great as I want. I can be an expert and people will regard me as such. So I'm aware of these, and that for many women, there are layers of suppression on that, and doubt and fears, and also even oppression that happens not only from men, but also amongst women. So I'm very interested in these dynamics. I, I can speak from my own experience and say, I don't know why I've always felt comfortable like turning on a camera and a microphone and speaking confidently about things. Again, I can guess that a lot of it has to do with my upbringing and being a boy, right? Being a man, being raised the way I was, or cultured the way I was, gendered the way I was. And on the other hand, as a parallel, my wife, who is a coach and an entrepreneur, she's kind of like a new coach and new entrepreneur, has had a lot of, I guess, blocks come up around like creating content, putting myself out there. Like, who am I to make a podcast? Who am I to make a YouTube video? And I just notice for myself, I don't have those blocks, right?
Yeah.
And that is such a difference for me to be able to just turn on the camera and the microphone and start recording. And this is the second business in which I've done this and made content and built expertise around like what I know. To your point, originally, a lot of what I teach is just what I just learned, especially in my private practice workshop business. It's like learn something, teach it, learn something, teach it. But also part of what that does is that builds expertise around, wow, this guy must know a lot. And it's like, well, there's both things that I know and also a lot that I don't know. And in reality, it's like I see myself as a facilitator and someone that's good at helping people get out of their own way, right? Creating that space for them to actually do the work. Whereas some of the work, if in a true business consulting fashion, might be like telling the person what to do or like teaching them about SEO or podcasting or how to price your services or whatever, right? So you get more into that consulting realm. So this is a long-winded answer to say I have the issue less, and here I am talking a ton, which proves that, yeah, I don't have that fuzzy.
I appreciate that you share that, because I think, in IFS, we talk about, we have individual burdens or individual wounds to be healed. And we also have ancestral burdens and cultural burdens. And what I find in women and just in myself is that the ancestral and the cultural wounds are significant in terms of helping us to step in more fully into our confidence and our work and our voices in the world and being safe, being seen. So, I actually, I mentioned one of my courses that kind of like about the business building pieces, and I have a whole other course for women entrepreneurs that's about the inner work pieces, because actually that's the bigger part. Actually, the business building is pretty simple, but it's all the stuff that comes up that's a lot more complex. And one of the things we do in there is unburdening of the wound of patriarchy and feelings that like it's not safe to rise up and to speak and
Yeah,
be seen. Lack of safety in our
yeah,
systems, in our bodies, in our nervous system around breaking free of that.
yeah. Yeah, some of the ways in which I benefit and suffer from the patriarchy, to my awareness, are there are ancestral burdens that go way back around overworking and proving a man's worth by being a provider and having that archetype that has been an example for me my whole life. That is, again, both can be a real driver and also a very dangerous dynamic to have inside of you, and I think many men feel quite burdened by that pressure. Even when externally there is safety or more than enough money, or you have two partners who are both working, in the household, there's this sense of like, if I'm not providing, I'm a failure. And it runs so deep. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I feel like that also feeds into the other cultural wounds of hyper individualism and materialism,
Yeah.
of like we need to do this all ourselves. And if we're not acquiring things, we're not safe or we're not accepted. And there's just so many of these that feed into each other, that's infiltrated in everything that we do. And it's hard to break
Yeah.
free of them. And like we were talking about earlier, just to like forge a new path, or just to create new role models for how how it's possible to have what we want without driving ourselves into the ground, or a lot of women without just hiding and not sharing your gifts with the world.
Mhm. Yeah, the role of mentors is massive. It's always been big in my life. My mentor who's been, doing what I wanna do, which is, like, being a really good trauma therapist, has been doing it for decades more than me, but also is the type of person I want to be. And so having that mentor and having that person that I am kind of striving toward being more like is really amazing, and I think people really lack mentors. It's part of the reason why people will seek out, like, a business coach or a business consultant is that kind of paid mentor type relationship, where someone is believing in you and guiding you and can help you deal with obstacles as they arise and get clear on your heart and who you are and what from a place of self as much as possible. So, yeah, I think it's huge.
I agree. I was talking about my longtime mentor earlier, who introduced me to IFS and introduced me to so many things that are so deeply important to me. I don't know who I would be right now without her. And when I first met her in my 20s, I saw like she's in a great marriage. She's has a thriving career and she's doing it her way. And that just gave me hope and kind of gave me something to look towards. And it continues to. And
Mhm.
I think that, mentoring is, I call the work that I do mentoring rather than coaching, because I like that model. I like that kind of field of mentorship of
Yeah,
like you were saying earlier, like here are things that I've learned,
yeah.
here's experience that I've gained, and I can share it with you.
Mhm.
It's um and it is important, I think, to have mentors over time that we grow with and evolve with and through different seasons. I feel like it's kind of like an older model of learning, even like apprenticeship or
It
something
is.
of just evolving together.
So people will ask me like, how do you get a mentor? And all I can say is that in my experience and with my mentor, I saw him doing therapy at a workshop and thought that's exactly the type of therapy I want to do. And so I just went up and asked him, like, what would it take to work with you or work under you and to learn from you? And a position didn't exist at the time for me to be an intern at his college counseling center. And then he created a position and said, if you want to work in this hallway closet and see people for free, I'll supervise you. And that was kind of how that started. But I guess in a way, like just asking really goes a long way. And I think people are afraid to ask. Again, I'm also aware of this like always being rewarded for being assertive type thing, and maybe that benefited me too to just go up and be like, "Hey, will you, how do I work for you?" And that worked. But I think it's like, yeah, both a very ancient way of like learning and knowing and being guided, and also kind of like not really talked about that much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think women do it too. And, when we see someone that inspires us, or we just feel that kind of like inner knowing, there's that saying when the student is ready, the teacher appears. It's like, oh, there they are. Okay. There's just like something lights up inside of us.
yeah,
And in my case, I just kept studying with her. I just kept doing things with her. And,
yeah,
all these years later, here we're still here together.
yeah. Yeah, it's I am, a therapist and working in this field of mental health for 15 some years, and it feels like in a way yesterday I was like seeking that mentor out, and then all of a sudden I wake up and I'm mentoring people, and therapists are coming to me, in that same position I was in and looking for guidance. So that's part of the richness that exists and that I love in the kind of lineage of psychotherapy is there's a lot of that learning that is kind of passed down through mentorship and supervision and whether it's formal or informal. And I really love that. What going back to these cultural burdens, I want to talk more about those. A lot of my practice has been in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, and so some of the values of Silicon Valley and the tech industry are like extreme individualism, materialism, and also this idea of productivity. I even had a client today who, about halfway through the session, just kind of stopped and said, "I'm sorry, like this session's like I'm not being productive in this session, am I?" And I was like, "I'm so glad you said that because let's talk about that and what being productive here means, right? Like if all you do today is explore this part of you, that feels like you're not being productive enough, you're not being a good enough client, then what if that was more than enough for our work today, right? But I just find these burdens to be tremendous, especially this one around productivity.
That is a big one. And I think about, when I do IFS a lot in groups. And so when women will come to like a group call and sometimes we'll do a parts check-in, what's happening for you, what parts you notice are present. And a lot of times they'll say, I'm noticing a part of me that is having a really hard time concentrating
Yeah.
and doesn't really want to be here, had a hard time coming here because I have so many things to do. And it's just like, this part just reminding me of this whole long list. It's like, what are we accomplishing here right now by
Yeah.
talking about this?
Yeah.
So, but I think that this helps what we were talking about earlier. It helps to slow down the mechanism that keeps us in this like pedal to the metal workaholic mode and starts to turn on that sea of curiosity. Well, what's driving this or who's driving this? And can we get to know them a little bit better?
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is uncomfortable for those parts because we inherently need to slow down in order to ask that. And these parts just want to speed up.
And of course, in IFS, not acknowledging the intention, the good intention of all parts, right? It's like, whoa, there's a part that really wants me to make sure I get everything done in a day, or that I don't fall behind, or that a part that actually has a sense of healthy urgency of I want to make the most of my time, right? Or have the
Yeah.
most impactful business possible. It's like, hey, thanks for that reminder. The reminder might come in a really intense way, or it might sound like a harsh inner critic. It might look and sound like mom or dad or whomever. But if you look at that intention, it's often to help motivate the person, the system, but often comes from a place of a place of polarity, you know, or of
A
a
place
burden
of
part,
fear.
place of fear.
Yeah. And like that question in IFS, what are you afraid would happen if
Yeah,
we weren't as productive? Or what are you afraid will happen if we're not as productive right now?
yeah,
And also, and I love that you presence that all parts ultimately have positive intention and that parts have agendas.
yeah,
So coming back to that kind of practice I was sharing earlier of that inner family meeting or kind of like an inner conference table we're talking about in business then. And when parts can start to see or hear different agendas, then it also expands their awareness of, oh, there's different ways of doing things. Like
yeah.
maybe we can be as productive without doing it this way that we've always done it. Or maybe we can actually be more productive if we do it in a different way.
Paradoxically, yeah, yeah. There's a part that wants to work a lot. There's a part that like just wants to play and says, "Hey, maybe your creative pursuits are falling by the wayside because you're working so much," right? Bringing those parts to the table, making them aware of self, starting that process of kind of unblending and negotiating around what we should do here and how we should spend our lives. Yeah, spend our time.
One of my business mentor years ago, and she shared with me, and I know others have shared this too, that at a certain point, overworking starts to look a lot like underworking. And I really just remind myself of that when I'm tired and I'm just like doing, doing, doing. And I know that I'm actually not being that efficient or effective. And I just came back. I take the month of August off every year for sabbatical. Last week was my first week back in the office. And every time after I take time off, I come back with new ideas. Like, how can I make things simpler? How can I do
Yeah.
less? And it's always an edge. It's always, it's like a continued growing exploration. And a lot of times the most successful people that I know say that actually the way to new levels is to do less, is to simplify
Yeah.
things. And there is something to that, to really exploring what that can look like for
Yeah.
each of us, just at whatever season we're in.
Letting your business breathe, getting some perspective, because obviously we spend most of the time in it, right? Working in the business rather than on it. The common concepts for getting that perspective, that time away, that space, the time to just do nothing. And then paradoxically, we end up getting the most clarity in those moments. It's like having a strike of clarity when you're in the shower and not thinking about your business. And you just have unbelievable clarity about what to do or whether or not to hire this person, right? So whatever
Wow.
it is. So productivity, can look so different. I remember explaining this at one point to someone that as a business owner, it's possible that me being out on the water surfing and not thinking about my business is more productive than sitting at the desk trying to think of new ideas or ways to grow the revenue or whatever. That's just been my experience over time, right? Is to spend as much time as I can stepping back, getting clearer. And those are when I find I'm most connected to creativity, or you could say, self energy tends to come in those moments more so than when I'm like at my computer trying to just force it, banging my head against
Yeah.
the wall.
Yeah. And also just speaking as a woman who's in midlife, I'm about to turn 47. One of the big epiphanies that I had during my time off last month was that I am definitely in perimenopause, and just really feeling that in my body, in my emotions, in my mind, and really understanding as I'm stepping back into things that I need to structure things in a different way. It's like it's a necessity for my health, for my sanity. And it's right now it feels challenging. It's
Yeah.
like my parts are like, how are we gonna do this? Like even just
Yeah.
needing to restructure when I have my meetings, when I eat my
Yeah.
meals, and really needing to make sure that I don't have periods of pushing. And it's always an invitation of like, yeah, there's a next level wanting to happen here. And to get there, we need to do things a different way. And how can we be creative in doing that?
That's right. Often parts are operating from historical contexts, right? And so you come back and parts are still working from those perspectives of how things were. I also find it interesting to ask people, what was the context during which you started your business? Early on in my career, I kind of fully became an entrepreneur during a bit of a crisis, basically. My wife had been laid off. All of a sudden, we lost health insurance. Every single bill was all of a sudden a major stressor. And just overnight, it meant that I had a crazy amount of urgency in my business. Really, it felt like a crisis. So that was both a potent fuel source for some time that eventually led to burnout. And so parts of me still don't trust that we're not in that crisis,
Hmm.
and that's where the
Yeah.
updating part of the unburdening sequence in IFS can be so helpful, is that of course parts are still going 100 miles an hour because they think I'm back there in that
Yeah.
crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, as we start to wrap up here in a few minutes, I guess what do you feel like is missing from the conversation, and anything you want to make sure that you share before we start to talk more about, yeah, your offerings and how you're helping people?
I feel like we covered, you know, the main points is to really, at least from where I'm sitting in this moment, is to create space to really listen to our higher self and be guided by that, to hold these inner family meetings, to have to bring our parts on board and to do more targeted one-on-one work with various parts that are needing more support,
Mhm.
and to recognize that this confidence, this courage, this clarity that we all want and need as leaders, this compassion, it's innate within us. It's already here. We don't need to seek it extrinsically. We don't need to take a course to learn how to be confident. It's already who we are. So how can we tap into these resources that live within us?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's kind of the ultimate message that IFS offers, the stance that IFS takes, and the paradigm shift that IFS talks about. You put it really, really nicely there. Yeah, Sarah, thank you again for doing this. And just to wrap up, maybe a little bit about more about your offerings and how you help women and how they can reach out and talk to you about working together.
Sure. Well, the best way to connect with me is on my podcast. It's called Herself, two words, and it blends IFS and women's spirituality. So you can find that wherever you listen to your podcast. And then my website is just my name, sarahavanstrover.com. And from there, you can see various ways to work together, whether it's an online program. I lead in-person retreats at various times of the year for women entrepreneurs and leaders. And I also do one-on-one mentoring.
Wonderful. We'll put links to that stuff in the description and show notes, of course. And yeah, Sarah, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate getting to know you and hearing about your work and lots of the overlap we have as well in terms of how we help people and who we help. So yeah, thank you again, and love to have you back sometime.
Thanks. I enjoyed our conversation.
All right, take care.